Greetings, everyone. Once again, it's Motawase sharing with you the authentic truth brought to us by Zulu Lassan in this time, in this era. So today, the teaching I'm about to share in English, it's going to be the mystery of the flying scroll and the ephah. Before I begin, I would like to thank Loba once again to have allowed us to know the truth in this time, in this era, through his mysterious son, Zulu Lassan. So the mystery of the flying scroll and the ephah. For that, we shall go first in the current classical day Bible, and later on, I will use Bibèl, the only authentic Bible without any errors and contradiction. So, for all of you out there who like solid nourishment, be ready. So, the flying scroll and the ephah. Not a lot of pastors even. Well, we know those fake pastors out there. They don't talk so much about the flying scroll and the ephah. What does it represent? So for that, we shall go in Zechariah chapter 5, verse 1. It says this: I looked again, and there before me was a flying scroll, period. So this is in the current classical day Bible. So you have to understand that Zechariah was speaking with an angel, according to the current classical day Bible. So he was receiving visions, spiritual visions. And we know that behind a vision, what is a vision? Many people don't know what is a vision. A vision is to see with the eyes of your spirit. And we know that in Job chapter 33, verse 14, it says this: For God speaks now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. And in Revelation chapter 14, verse 6, in the New International Version, it says this: Then I saw another angel flying in mid-air, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who lived on the earth, to every nations, tribes, language, and people. So you have to understand that flying scroll was a symbolic representation of what was also mentioned in Revelation 14:6, which is a gospel. And what is that gospel? What is that news? What is that scriptures? Because a scroll is basically like a book that you see. So it's a scroll and there's writings on it. So it's basically like a scriptures. And what did that scroll have on it? What was the purpose of that scroll? Because everything that Zechariah was seeing had a meaning, and it was for something, because there's a reason behind everything. So in Zechariah chapter 5, verse 2, he says this: He asked me, do you see? ? So that's the angel in the current classical day Bible who's asking, what do you see? I answered, I see a flying scroll, 20 cubits long and 10 cubits wide. So that scroll came in a form of sentence, a judgment on men, because it was a flying scroll. So that means it was in the air and it was going down. Zechariah chapter 5, verse 3. He said to me, this is the curse that is going out over the whole land. For according to what it says on one side, every thief will be banished, and according to what it says on the other, everyone who swears falsely will be banished. So that was the sentence, that was the judgment that was coming on earth, that the vision that Zechariah was seeing. In Zechariah chapter 5, verse 4, in the New International Version, it says this: The Lord Almighty declares, I will send it out, and it will enter the house of the thief and the house of anyone who swears falsely by my name. It will remain in that house and destroy it completely, both its timbers and its stones. So that was the representation of that judgment, that sentence. So also it will be sort of a representation of the world, the word that will go in the nation, in the land, on the people, and will expulse the evil, the bad from the people. So we know, for example, that when it says here, it will enter the house of the thief and the house of anyone who swears falsely by my name. So the house can also represent the body. And that the scroll, so that means the judgment, the sentence, those words will enter inside that person. For example, once someone listens to the message, listen to the truth, those words go inside the person and judge the person, and the person can distinguish what is good, what is bad, and if he accepts, he can decide to let go of the evil side, the bad side, the sin, and change that person. So expulse all the evil thoughts that maybe the person had, his evil desires, and so on. And that's what was going on in a global scale on the people regarding those that Zechariah saw on the land. Hebrew chapter 4 verse 12 to 13, it says this: for the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thought and attitude of the heart. Zechariah chapter 5 verse 5. So in Hebrew 4:12, that's what it represents. Like I've mentioned regarding the message, that scroll, you have to understand that that's living, and it goes and judge the evil deeds that the people were doing, expulse the thief from the land, and live on the land. Then that person, it transforms that person. Zechariah chapter 5 verse 5, New International Version. Then the angel who was speaking to me came forward and said to me, look up and see what is appearing. So first he saw the scroll, and he saw the scroll, and the angel explained to him what did the scroll represent, and what's going to take place. And then after that, so after the scroll, you have to understand that after that has, meaning after the scroll and that judgment, what's going to take place then? After the thief is expulsed, Zechariah chapter 5 verse 5, then the angel who was speaking to me came forward and said to me, look up and see what is appearing. Zechariah 5:6, I said, what is it? He said, this is the ephah going forth, period. Now, what is an ephah? Is an ancient Hebrew dry measure. So it's a measure. And again, he said, this is their appearance in all the land. In the New Living Translation, it says this in Zechariah chapter 5 verse 6. What is it? I asked. He replied, it's a basket for measuring grain. So it was an instrument of measure. In Leviticus chapter 19 verse 35 to 36, it says this: do not use the dishonest standard when measuring length, weight, or quantity. Verse 36, use honest scales and honest weights. An honest ephah and an honest hin. So that's what the ephah is. It was an instrument of measure. So Zechariah chapter 5 verse 6, and again he said, this is their appearance in all the land. In King James Bible, it says this: this is their resemblance through all the earth. So, the ephah was the appearance, their resemblance. What was their resemblance? For that we shall in Zechariah chapter 5 verse 7, it says this: then the cover of lead was raised, and there in the basket sat a woman. Sat a woman. Now, what does that woman, why was a woman represented their resemblance? That's the question. And you have to understand that I've shared with you the teaching regarding Jezebel and the spirit that is acting in many churches and in society in general. And that was the sin basically of the inhabitant. Because when the scroll judge and expulse the thief and so on, so all that evil, that was the measurement of the inhabitant of the territory, so of the land. And all their sin basically of those people had the appearance of a woman. You have to understand that behind that, the water sirens were in action. They were the one that were causing the trouble and influencing the people to do to basically go against the law, to go against the recommendation. And in verse 6 of Zechariah chapter 5 verse 6, he says this in the New International Version. He says this: this is the iniquity of the people throughout the land. New Living Translation, and it's filled with the sins of everyone throughout the land. English Standard Version, this is the basket that is going out. And he said, this is their iniquity. So their resemblance, their iniquity, their wickedness had the form of a woman. So to all the women out there, sisters who are listening to the message, that shouldn't make you feel any sort of way or make you feel, let's say, guilty or weird that the sin of the inhabitants of the people was a woman. Behind that woman, you have to understand, it was the spirit of Jezebel, meaning it was the water sirens that were in action. And those are the one that were basically expulsed when they said that, according to the scroll, the thief will be expulsed. That means also when the thief is expulsed, that means the spirits that inhabit the thief will be expulsed as well. So all those evil spirits, those demons, will be expulsed. And after that, that's their measurement. So all that is measured, meaning they're now in that measure. and it was a woman. It was the water siren. Now if we go in Zechariah chapter 5 verse 8, he said, "This is wickedness." And he pushed her back into the basket and pushed its lid cover on it, down on it. Aramaic Bible in plain English. And he said to me, "This is sin." And he cast her inside the measure, and he cast the talent of lead upon his mouth. So that sin, you have to understand that that's the lies, the adultery, fornication, masturbation, the fake pastor, fake teachings, the murderers, all those evil, everything that is going against the moral law, against the law. That's what it was. In Proverbs chapter 13 verse 6, in New International Version, it says this: "Righteousness guards the person of integrity, but wickedness overthrows the sinner." Zechariah chapter 5 verse 8, "And pushed its lead cover down on it." So because that woman, so that sin, wanted to go out, so because she was inside, so that means she wanted to again be at work on the people, but the lead cover was put on it. Zechariah chapter 5 verse 9, "Then I looked up, and there before me were two women with the wind in their wings. They had wings like those of a stork, and they lift up the basket between heaven and earth." Now, a stork are large, long-legged, long-necked, wading birds with long, stout bills. Many species are migratory. And you have to understand that in Leviticus chapter 11 verse 13, we reveal why those two women, why did they have wings of stork? In Leviticus chapter 11:13, it says this: "These are the birds you are to regard as unclean." And in verse 19, it says the stork. So spiritually, you have to understand that those stork will represent a sort of birds that in the spiritual sense are in those women and their wings is basically because there's water sirens and there's also sirens of the air that if Loba allows it, I will reveal the origin of those demons, those water sirens, how they came to be. That's why in Leviticus 11:13 it says there's unclean birds. Why are they unclean? What's the relation? You have to understand that that's because in the spiritual sense, in a period in time, there were some actions that's why those two women, they had those wings, right? You see the relation. So they have similarities. I will go more in depth if Loba allows in another video. But here on the teaching on the ephah, you have to understand that was water sirens in the ephah, and those two birds, those two women with wings, were two sirens of the air. You can also research. If you search, for example, sirens, representation, you'll see some of them. It's a woman with wings, so it's not only mermaids in the water. No, there's other type of demons out there, and female demons that have that are not only of the waters, basically. Zechariah chapter 5, verse 10, New International Version. Well, before I go there, in verse 9 it says, they had wings like those of a stork, and they lift up the basket between heaven and earth. So they lift up the basket. And verse 10, where are they taking the basket? Question mark. I asked the angel who was speaking to me. Zechariah chapter 5, verse 11, New Living Translation. He replied, to the land of Babylonia, where they will build a temple for the basket, and when the temple is ready, they will set the basket there on its pedestal. So, Babylonia will represent the nations, not because, there is the people, according to the current day Bible, the people of God, and then there's the nations, Babylonia, those who practice iniquity. So the scroll purifies the art, the sin, and is put in the ephah, and that sin is Jingu Mamadiba. So the water sirens, like when you read, for example, in what they call the Old Testament regarding Achab and Jezebel, because she took authority over him, and she was able to influence him and make him go against the law. And it's the same. You have to understand that is the same thing that's going on spiritually, in the spiritual sense, where those water sirens are at work and they influence the people. And that's what you see in the fake assemblies, fake churches. There's so much iniquity going on. There's lies. There's fake woman pastors out there that are taking authority over the men in the assembly. That's just one example, but there's many, even their teachings are wrong. So that was the ephah, the flying scroll, what it represents, and the ephah according to the current Classical Day Bible. Now, we shall go into Bibèl to show you the demonstration of the difference between the current Classical Day Bible as well, that they've taken from the copies of books that they found in ancestral Africa, and they've tried to rewrite, change things, but we're going to read in Bibèl, and I will be translating it here in English, and that's going to be in Zechariah chapter 5. Now, Zechariah 5, it says this in Bibèl, the only authentic Bible. And his true name is Jongele. It says this in Zechariah chapter 5, verse 1. I raised my eyes again and looked. That's in Bibèl. And behold, there was a mysterious flying scroll. Period. Verse 2. So that's Zechariah in his vision. He was talking to who? To the Mutatidi, who is the entity. So an entity of the great order of things. Verse 2. He said to me, what do you see? I replied, I see a mysterious boom, in brackets, scroll, flying. It is 10 meters long and 5 meters wide. Verse 3. Mutatedi, the entity, said to me, it is Mbaki, in bracket, the curse, that is spreading throughout the land, for according to it, every thief will be driven out from here, and according to it, every perjury will be driven out from here. Verse 4. Mundima Bikoksidi, who is the entity of punishment in charge of the nature's domain, spreads it, said Mutatedi, the entity, so that it may enter the house of the thief and of him who speaks falsely in the name of Tete, in the name of Loba, that he may establish its dwelling there, and that he consumes it with wood and stone. I'll repeat verse 4. Munzima Bekokisedi spreads it, said Mutatedi, the entity, so that he may enter the house of the thief and of him who speaks falsely in the name of Tete, that he may establish its dwelling there, and that he consumes it with wood and stone. So you see, it was a judgment, a punishment, a sentence that was going in the land and entering the house of those who commit iniquity. Verse 5. Who was speaking? Mutatedi, the entity who was speaking with me, came forward and said, lift up your eyes and see what comes out there. I replied, verse 6, I replied, what is it? What is this? And Mutatedi, the entity, said to me, this is the grand measure coming out. Then Mutatedi, the entity, added, it is their iniquity throughout the land. Verse 7, at that moment, the cover, which was in the shape of a disc, was lifted, and a Jenguma Madiba, in bracket, water siren, was seen having the body and face of a white woman sitting in the grand measure. So there was a water siren with the face of a white woman, and that was Jenguma Madiba. That's the name. Verse 8, the entity said to me, so Mutatedi, the entity, said to me, this is seduction. And Mutatedi, the entity, pushed her back inside the measure and blocked the opening, without her being able to see Mutatedi, the entity. And through the lid, which was disc-shaped over the opening, because Jenguma Madiba, the water sirens, wanted to come out. Verse 9. I raised my eyes and looked, and behold, two Menguma Nango, in bracket, air sirens, half bird, half woman hybrids, with the body of birds and the face of a white woman appeared. Period. The wind was blowing on their wings. They had wings like those of the stork. They removed the measure between earth and heaven. Verse 10, I said to Mutatedi, the entity who was speaking with me, where are they taking the measure? Question mark. Verse 11, and Mutatedi, the entity, answered me, they are going to build her a house in the territory of the whites and the mixed bloods, and she will be deposited there in her place. So that was the mystery of the flying scroll and the ephah. All glory to Loba, the true and unique creator.